Here we go. Welcome everyone to our late March, early April now, but our March Read with Sharon book club this month. And we have with us Mariah Fredericks. Mariah is going to wave in the corner there. And she's going to talk to us this week about her great book, The Wharton Plot. Before we get started, if there's anybody new, I'm just going to kind of explain sort of the rules. If you guys would all put yourselves on mute so that if there's barking dogs or screaming children or nagging husbands in the background, we don't have to hear them. I have all three of those, so it's okay. Although the children don't scream anymore. They usually just yell at each other. But anyway, so if you can mute yourselves, and when you ask a question, there's a feature at the bottom that says you can wave your hand. And I'm not toggling. Am I toggling between two screens? Not yet, I don't think. Yes, I am, actually. Sometimes if you guys just wave and you don't know how to use that function, I'll see you. And then I'll call on you. You can ask your question of Mariah. And Mariah tonight, instead of us doing polls, Mariah has brought with her some slides that she's going to share in a bit. But first, I want to introduce her and her great book. If you guys have been with us for a while, she was with us, what, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, Mariah, with the Lindbergh Nanny?
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I love her writing. And I just want to thank you, Mariah. I'm going to start off a bit for this fabulous book. And what I really, enjoyed about it was, I know you'd said earlier when we were talking offline that you'd not really written in third person before, that this was you're always a first person. I'm always the other way. But I just love the way you talked almost like as if she was actually, the way she wrote, and some of the tongue-in-cheek that was in her vocabulary and in the dialogue was clearly in her head, the way she thought. And I just thought that was wonderfully reflective of how I envisioned an Edith Wharton kind of person to be. And at first, I didn't think I was going to like her, frankly, and I would be interested to get some other folks' here comes Savannah now, some other folks' impressions of whether they liked her or not. But at the end, I obviously I really did adore her and adore the way that she sort of handled things. But the beginning was a little bit snooty and a little bit off-putting, which I know that you tried to do. But I just think it's just wonderful how you were able to capture the way she wrote, her voice in these books, in her head and her dialogue and in her behavior. So with that, I'd like to start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this, sort of your process you went through, and just give us an overview of how you fell in love with the story.
Well, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And thank you all so much for rescheduling with me and putting up with my time goof. This book actually started with the murder of David Graham Phillips, because it's a New York murder. I'd always been fascinated by it. It's the killing that ushered in the Sullivan Act, which made it a felony to carry any weapon small enough to be concealed. I knew that the Supreme Court was considering invalidating that legislation. And there's something about this killing in 1911 that feels so resonant with the end of the Gilded Age in New York. The fact that it takes place in Gramercy Park, outside Stanford White's old house, that he was a muckraker who enraged Teddy Roosevelt, that he was gunned down in the middle of the street. All of this just feels like a harbinger of, the Great War to come. But I couldn't really think of how to do it because it's not so well known and so fascinating to most people, like the Lindbergh kidnapping. So when we were kicking it around, my editor said, I love this idea, but I'd really love to get a woman in the story as a detective. And I thought, oh, sure, that's easy enough. And I was trying to think who was, a powerful, interesting woman with a certain amount of enfranchisement. And I thought, what was Edith Wharton doing at that time? And I thought, oh, well, she'll be in France at this time. And I was astonished to see that within 3 months, she was at the Belmont Hotel, basically having a midlife crisis. She was 49 years old. She was desperate to leave her husband. She wanted to change publishers. She was concerned that her career was kind of floundering, or what she wrote was no longer seen as current or modern. It had been 5 years since her last big hit. And she was coming off a really disastrous, toxic love affair. And Phillips wrote incredibly obnoxious, censorious novels about women. And here she was going through a very authentic time in her life as a woman. So I thought, let's put these two together and see how that works.
So you don't really know if she had any involvement. I know I read your author's notes, obviously, and you'd said that, the timing was kind of close. She was there, but you don't really know that she was involved or not in it all. If she went to his funeral or had any meeting with him.
No,
This is all just, yes.
As far as I've read, I have not seen that they ever met in person, but she did read his final novel. And she liked him a lot more than I did. And she ended up working with his editor, Rutger Bleecker Jewett, who's a character in the book. So all of that is true.
So basically, this gave you an opportunity to tell two stories.
Yeah.
To tell the story of her falling apart, marriage, her midlife. Is that midlife 50, 49? I don't know. That middle of your life crisis that she went through between her marriage and the issues with her publisher and being treated, less than others. And then, of course, bringing in the Henry James and all those guys. That was really kind of cool. And a David Phillips murder. So it was really two stories in one from your perspective. Great, great. So in terms of her relationship with Teddy Wharton, was it that bad? Was he that crazy? Do we know, or what's your thoughts on that?
He was pretty crazy. His father had melancholia, for which he had been institutionalized, and unfortunately later committed suicide. So there was a genetic component there. And he was in and out of sort of mania and depression, and they tried to manage it. But, treatment of these things at that time were like, go to a spa, get wrapped up in things, take more exercise.
Yeah. I just finished my my third book, and there's a lot. Well, actually, it was in the first book, the second book too, but some of the treatments were, enemas. I mean, and bromide salts, which is a potassium bromide stuff that they use now to put people to sleep, in lethal injections. I mean, it's insane the way they used to treat folks. It's pretty bad, actually.
Yeah. So they tried for men. I mean, they were never they weren't an ideal match. They sort of married each other because, hey, you had to get married. And you can kind of chart how bad it was, because at first, when she was asking people like Henry James and Walter Berry, what do you think? Should I leave him? They're like, see if you can work it out. Life as a divorced woman. And then there's sort of a turning point around 1908, 1910, where we don't know what Henry James saw, but he did a complete 180. He's like, nope, you have to, that was horrible. His behavior is terrible. You have to leave him. So, but she never spoke ill of him, which is interesting. I mean, she would get fed up with him, but she never told the story as if it was sort of, she's Nora in a doll's house and he's a terrible brute. She always understood that he was a deeply ill person.
So that was there. In terms of the writing of this, how long did it take you to do this?
It was about 10 months. This was a fast,
wow.
and coming to grips with 3 major writers in 9 months was a lot.
Any particular character that you were more fond of that you know, besides obviously Edith? I mean, you had to struggle to write her, I assume. Let's do that first. How would you describe getting into her head? How much did you know ahead of time about her in terms of how much of her writing have you read? In terms of really, I know you're from New York, so you got those scenes down pretty well. But in terms of really understanding her and your depiction of her.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I was a little older than she was when I started this particular book, but I had started thinking, why do I never see anyone older than maybe 32 in historical and particularly historical mysteries? Like, they all have to be in their 20s and alive and open to life. And I thought I'd really like to be writing somebody a little closer to my age who's dealing with some of the things that you deal with in your late 40s and early 50s. You do start thinking, all right, we don't have all anymore. Are we living the life that we want to live? I was a huge fan of Edith Wharton back to high school, where we would read Henry James, and I said, yeah, James is good, but Wharton is better. And I had always, because I wrote a Gilded Age series, the Jane Prescott series, I would turn to Wharton's letters to see how they, like, little details, like who owned a car, who owned a telephone, because I thought, well, she's rich. If she owns these things, then the family in my book can own them too. So I was very familiar with her voice. And it was just a happy accident of writing, channeling that woo-woo side of writing, that I have a fairly good ear for voices. So um, I was happy to be able to pick Edith up fairly easily.
And in terms of other characters, were there one in particular that resonated with you? There's a lot of characters in this book, so
Yeah.
curious.
I really love her editor, Rutger Bleecker Jewett, that he's very gentle. He really I guess he's sort of a fantasy editor, that he loves writers. He's a bit flirtatious with her. He's very protective of writers. He's a fantasy editor. I also love her dog. I loved writing dog. and he was kind of like, she didn't have a Pekingese on this trip, apparently. The people at the Mount informed me. But I was like, I'm sorry, he needs to be, he's just here. He is full blown, I'm not getting rid of him. And so she had a Pekingese in this book.
Interesting. Do we have some questions that anybody wants to pose to Mariah about this book or about her writing or about anything else that she's doing? Yes, Eileen.
Yeah, I had a question about the title. I didn't quite understand why you called it the Wharton Plot, because I couldn't see that it was a plot against Wharton or that she was creating a plot. So I wondered how you came up with that title.
Well, the quick answer is I didn't. The publisher did. We weren't. I really wanted something like the things I was playing with was Mrs. Wharton and the Abhorrent Author, things like that. Mrs. Wharton, I can't remember. I was calling her Mrs. Wharton in the title. And they said, nope, that's too long. And for a while, it was the Age of Guilt, Age of Innocence, Age of Guilt. And I said, that just sounds too much like a nonfiction. And I wasn't really sure that the casual Edith Wharton fan would immediately make that connection. So we went back and forth and back and forth. And finally we ended. They wanted something like the Lindbergh Nanny, so it's the Wharton Plot. But I don't disagree with you that it's not the perfect fit for this novel. But they like it short so they can have a big, beautiful image on the cover that's not obscured by words.
Miriam, thank you much, Eileen. By the way, but real quick on covers, I will tell you, you know, I've always written made my own titles for my own books. And this last go around, they absolutely insist that I put a "the" in front of it. It really annoys me. So you ever see, I'll put a little small "the" and then the whole title, because, you know, they do have final say. And sometimes you just, Eileen's, by the way, an author also, Mariah. So I know she knows this, right? They make you do unseen things.
Well, fortunately, I've never had a title changed on me, so.
Oh, that's very impressive.
I've been fortunate.
Or arguing about them constantly. All right, Miriam.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful book. I really enjoyed seeing New York City through the eyes of the Gilded Age. So, well, one was I really was enchanted by the fact that you captured her language. I really felt like I was really hearing Edith Wharton talking and Henry James talking. That was really cool. So I guess my question is, are you going to do another book that features an author as detective? It seems to be a new subgenre. So I'm wondering if your editor wants you to do another one with her as the detective.
I was really hoping that my editor would. And I mentioned, you know, Edith Wharton wrote a mystery play, which was never put on. It was in rehearsal, and it suddenly came off for unknown reasons. And I thought that would be awesome. Or her and Mary Roberts Reinhardt going around, you know, France in World War One. But they are very they've been burned with series. So so my new book is also about a New York murder and several New York writers. I swore I would never do a lot of writers again. But this is the 1920 murder of Joseph Elwell. It's the original locked room killing.
Mariah, you broke up. You broke up there for a second, Mariah. Could you say it again? We missed it.
It's the 1920 murder of Joseph Elwell, who was the nation's bridge expert. He taught the Vanderbilts how to play bridge, and he was found shot in his West 70s townhouse. All the doors and windows were locked, and there was no gun on the premises. And the person who will be solving the murder is Morris Markey, who most people have not heard of today. He was a young Virginian who at that time wrote for the Daily News, but then became one of the major founding writers on the New Yorker. And he covered a lot of true crime for the New Yorker. And 30 years after the Elwell killing, he wrote an article for Esquire about the old Jazz Age murder that they never really solved. Right after that, he himself was found murdered in his home with a bullet through the brain. And because it's a 20s murder, he's going to be assisted by another writer who herself died in a locked room, and that is Zelda Fitzgerald. So we're keeping the writer and the New York murder thing going, at least, and hopefully I'll get to go back to Edith, because she really does have so many great stories.
So are you doing this book as one timeline or two? Your new book?
It begins with the Markey death and ends with the Markey death. And then in between that is the Elwell death.
So no back and forth.
Go back and forth, just the beginning and the end. Unless my editor reads it and says, we want to go back and forth. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I enjoyed the previous one.
Thank you.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Mariah, is that, you know, back in those times and even before then, you know, the police didn't do a lot of detective work, at least from the research I've done on some of the things I've looked into. It's always been the journalists, the
Right.
newspaper reporters, the you know, the Hearst papers, you know, they're always looking for a story. And so you found them being detective as well as court reporters, as well as, you know, just doing their own job. So that's it kind of falls into that sort of space.
Yeah, it's so much easier when they have a real professional reason to investigate, follow up leads, whereas with Edith, I was happy with the way it worked out. But you know, I do have to get the reader over that hurdle of Edith is now going to investigate a murder.
Should have stumbled into it though, right?
Yeah. But you know, without, it's always that difficult thing of, you don't, as Mary Roberts Reinhardt says, the reader gets impatient if the detective is putting herself at risk in a stupid way. So, you know, she's like, I know, I'll go meet and talk to the killer. Like, you have to do that work that you don't have to do with a journalist necessarily.
So, Mary, would you have a question?
Well,
yes,
yeah, I was
yes,
just going to make a statement that that this becomes you know, having the author or the journalist be the detective, but the author or a fake character like, you know, Sherlock Holmes, it being the detective. This has become an interesting subgenre, and I'm seeing a lot of books picking up this trend of taking a historical character or a historical fictional character and making them into the detective. So you're right. You're right there on the cusp of what's happening out there in the literary world. And, you know, I think your readers are getting that, you know, they get it, that it's a real person who's doing this, and you've given them something maybe imaginary to investigate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I read a lot. I review a
yeah,
lot.
Miriam's a reviewer. She's one of those, you know, people that does this as a profession. So
Yes.
yeah, we've got some professors. We have Diane's got her hand up, and another author on. So, you know, there's a lot of very interesting folks in this group. I learned so much every book club. Thank you, Miriam. Diane, another author and a former surgeon, doctor.
Oh,
Yes,
doctor,
ma'am.
not surgeon.
Oh, doctor. Well, close. You went to med
Yeah,
school, so that
close.
counts.
So I just wanted to make a comment more than a question. I really enjoyed the way you portrayed life in a big city. You know, it brought me back to like when I lived in Montreal, or I used to live across from Manhattan, and you have these circles of people and they all know each other and they all go to the same places. And so they have all these interactions that are out on the street or in cafes. And sometimes, you know, they never even see each other's home. So I did enjoy that aspect of your book and enjoyed the book too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you had brought with you, because one thing I found when I was, you know, reading this, and I try not to do it. How many of you guys were Googling? Okay. And I tried not to Google so much the facts around this when I was reading it, because I knew it was going to ruin it for myself. I did not know who killed David Phillips. I didn't want to know, because I wanted to find out when my protagonist, when Edith found out. But I wanted to see the pictures, what they look like. I mean, you had this one great description. I think it was either Depew or it was Cornelius Vanderbilt. I forget which one it was, but you said he had these, you know, mutton chops, silvered sideburns, and the dome head with his keen blue eyes and his eyebrows that looked like eagle's feathers or something, or eagle's wings. I was like, I got this guy. So when I Googled him, I'm like, oh my God, that is him. So, you know, I know that you had, who else did that? Was it more were you guys Googling more for the pictures that they look like? That's what I was doing. Like, if I read the story, then I would ruin it. But Mariah has brought with her some slides that we share the screen here, so she can take over the screen if you guys want to see them. Who wants to see them? Yeah, of some of these folks. And Mariah, you know, just like I said, that that one character, I remember just I could just see him, you know, and lo and behold, when I did it, and the same thing I was trying to with David Phillips. You know, I just couldn't imagine this white suit with this chrysanthemum kind of thing, and apparently that's how he dressed.
Yep.
Very,
Yep.
you know, eccentric.
Yeah, he's a very interesting guy. I don't think I have a picture of him in a white suit, but I do have some pictures. So I will share my screen. And there we go. Okay.
Ooh, she's a ginger, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Now let me. Can people only see images?
Breaking up
Can they
again.
see
You're breaking up
my
again.
screen as well? Oh, can people see my you know what?
Yeah, we can
there
see
we
your
go.
pictures. You're sometimes your audio breaks up. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay,
But we got you now. We can hear you. I can hear you anyway.
let's see. And can you see my screen or just
Yes,
the image?
ma'am. We got you.
Okay, all right. So I love these two pictures of Edith because you have, you know, on the left, it's this, you know, beautiful, sumptuous, gorgeous image of an innocent, beautiful child. And on the right hand, you have a very stressed, probably highly perceptive young lady. And I think it sort of captures what she does so well in her fiction, which is she gives you all the beauty and the artistic elegance of her time, but she also gives you the intensity of the feelings. So here is Edith and David Graham Phillips. You can see he has a very intense stare. He doesn't look like he has an enormous sense of humor. But they
He
are
looks like an actor of some sort of actor, like from today.
Yes.
I can't
Yes.
place it, but yeah, he has that look.
Maybe there's maybe a touch of, I don't know, Kiefer Sutherland, or maybe I'm just rewatching.
Yeah, no, you're right. I can see it.
Rewatching 24 right now. So on the 23rd of January, 1911, he leaves his house on 119 West 19th Street. You can still, the house is still standing today. You can see that above the door, we have these miserable severed heads. I'm not sure how welcoming that would be to come home to. And he passes by Gramercy Park. This is, you're looking down. If you took a turn on the right, you would, right around the corner there would be his apartment building. The statue of Booth did not exist during his time. They added that later, but it's sort of funny to think he would have passed by a statue of the brother of yet another assassin.
This is Edwin Booth right here,
Yeah, this is Edwin.
or not, or Junius, the father. So it's a brother.
It's Edwin. You're right.
Okay.
Thank you for providing.
I don't know which one, but
I
Junius
totally
is the father.
Right. No, it's Edwin Booth because he founded the Players Club, which is right around
Gotcha.
here. So he is on his way to the Princeton Club to pick up his mail that had very recently been the home of Stanford White, who, and then after his death, he was deeply in debt, so they auctioned it off. You can see this beautiful sort of entryway that White added to the building. Unfortunately, they have knocked it down, and this is what's there today. It was a hotel where a lot of very famous people stayed, but architecturally it's not that fascinating. Here is a picture of Edith. I think this is her author photo. And when Anna Walling refers to her author photo, in which, you know, they want to portray her as this, you know, grande dame of society, this is always what I had in mind. Here is the Belmont Hotel, where she was staying. I think I may have gotten the number of floors wrong. I think I said there were 12. It looks like there are more like 16. But here is the hotel, and it overlooked at the time Grand Central Station, which you can see at this point in time. They were tearing it down and building it back up at the same time. And I just thought that that was such an incredible image for where Edith was in her life, that she's sort of tearing down aspects of her old world and building them back up at the same time. Here is poor Teddy with some books. We have our little chihuahuas, and I don't know who this is. It's very cute. I can't tell if it's just the style of photography at the time or whether Teddy was very uncomfortable, but I think you can see he's not entirely well.
Before you run off, someone in the chat put one of your descriptions up. Who did it about Teddy's teeth? Was it Teddy's teeth? I don't know. But it was very good about its teeth. I was looking at someone had just taken that. Where's the chat? I can't see it really quick. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, someone. Oh no, never mind. It was Goldsberg. Wrong teeth. I thought someone was talking about Teddy's teeth. I saw the rot and I assumed it was teeth for a second. Yeah. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting description to the way you described his moving teeth. And we've all struggled with that, right? Our teeth start to move a bit when we get older. Interesting.
Well, he did have to have them. His doctor, when he came, said his teeth should be pulled. And it was like, oh God, really? Like this poor man whom I don't want to live with anymore. But
you know what I was concerned when you suggested that, there was, I don't know if you guys have watched The Nick, but there's that scene in there where the doctor was pulling the teeth of people who were deemed mentally insane because they felt the rot of the teeth was causing their brain to rot. This was probably around 1902, 1905. But it's an interesting, when you first said that, I thought, oh my gosh, they're pulling his teeth because they think that's what's causing him to be crazy in that same time period.
I hadn't thought of that. I wonder if you're right. I
don't know. It was a New York doctor, and I can't remember his name. But and they had a sanitarium up in Westchester, I think, area. And that's where they were pulling teeth, literally, because they thought that the decay in the teeth was, oozing into the brain and causing the issues.
On a totally side issue, a relative of mine played the health inspector in The Nick.
He's interesting.
So
he liked his peach Melba.
Yeah. Here is the tea room of the Belmont, where so many of the scenes take place. It was a palm room. I later learned that basically every hotel had to have a palm room for some reason. But here is where the famous dinner was held with, Edith was in personal crisis. So she did what we all do. She invited her close friends to dinner and said, oh my God, what should I do with my life? And those men were Henry James. This is the sergeant portrait, I believe, that he hated. And him and Edith on one of their many jaunts. Here is Walter Berry, who many people, it was thought for many decades that he was her lover. They thought that during her lifetime and then afterwards, people also believed that to be true, that she had this mystery affair and nobody knew who the guy was. And everyone was like, oh, we all know it's Walter. And it's true that when he died in 1927, she said, the great love of my life has died and I with him, I want to be with him. However, it was this guy who was her lover. And we found that out in the late 20th century when his letters appeared on the market, because he had sold them, because that's the kind of guy he was. Morton Fullerton was a really interesting challenge to write, because it's hard to write sexual magnetism over the decades and figure out like why. I mean, you know, I guess he's a good looking guy, but he clearly had something. Maybe if he didn't have the mustache, he would be better.
He was a charmer. We all know
Really?
those kind of guys. You know, they sweet talk you, and then they, you know, we all know what their objective. It's my, I've got one of those. Not in real life. I'm talking one of my books. You know, he's that guy.
He's that guy. Well, Edith had excellent taste, but I wouldn't say in her romantic partners. And here are the Wallings, who, as you can see, are a highly attractive couple. I feel a little badly. I feel William Walling was more substantial than I gave him credit for in the book. He had to be a believable suspect. He was part of the founding of the NAACP. You know, he was a wealthy man, but he really tried to do good in the world. And their marriage survived the lawsuit that the young woman brought against him, but it did not survive the Great War. He believed that America should be in it, and she was firmly opposed and left him. There's another picture of David Graham Phillips. One of the things that I never quite figured out with Phillips was why, I advanced the theory, but why he had no romantic life. He was obviously a very good-looking guy. He had very strong feelings about women. He, you know, seemed to have very romantic feelings for them. Susan Lennox is full of these, you know, incredibly descriptions of Susan, and yet he lived with his sister and had no partner that we know of. There's one tiny gossip column item that he finally found a woman he could stand, but I have no idea who she is.
In the story, you know, I'm trying to remember. I read this a while ago when you sent it to me as an arc. But the relationship between, you know, Phillips and his sister versus the relationship between that we talk about, you know, I guess midway through, between Fullerton and his sister, or his adopted sister.
Yeah.
Talk about some parallels. I mean, how did you know, in terms of what you wanted to do or what you didn't do, or what you know, could have done more of, or you decided, no, I'm not going to near that. But any parallels there that you wanted to sort of just chat about?
Well, it did strike me that the major emotional relationship in Phillips's life was with his sister. I mean, she traveled with him, they adored each other, they lived together, and that Fullerton had this very warped emotional, possibly physical entanglement with his adopted sister. So what I wanted to depict with Phillips was that it was sort of a domineering marriage, that, since everybody's read the book, you know, his sister had been part of one unsatisfactory marriage, and she kind of decides, I don't want to be a part of a second domineering marriage. Like, he's built up this vision of me that I don't want to live with anymore. So so that's where, that's as far as I went. My editor felt very strongly we should leave incest out of it, and I kind of agreed with her on that.
But the parallels are very similar. That's why, you know, having her Edith understand it in a weird way, I thought was pretty intriguing. Yeah. Oh, headlines.
Yes. So so the death really did make enormous waves, particularly in New York. He was a very famous author. It was broad daylight. The idea that you could be shot 6 times near Gramercy Park, and was pretty horrific. So it really did have a major major impact. Did something.
I'm sorry, I lost you, Mariah. Janine, you got a question?
Oh,
We lost you for a second, but Janine's got a question real quick.
Hi, everybody. I'm just interested about all these different newspapers. You're right, that was the internet of the day back then. There were all these newspapers. How did you pick them? And do you know enough about the voices of the different papers to know which ones to go to? And where did you get them? Is it like the New York Public Library or is it online? This is because the picture that you draw in this book is so full. And I thought this lady researched a lot. So I'm just curious, where did you go and how long did it take and that type of thing? And I'll turn my mic off. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Newspapers.com is the most amazing resource, and I'm using it to death for the next book as well. And you get all sorts of, all you have to do is put in David Graham Phillips and the year, and boom, it all comes up. And yeah, it's an incredible. Another resource that I'm really loving is Ancestry.com, because I was using, I really wanted to know what my new protagonist looked like at the age that I'm writing about him. And descendants of his have published his passport application when he was 19 years old, you know, his death certificate, where you can see the conflicting times of death. You know, all sorts of amazing stuff is on there. They are paid subscriptions, which is a bit of a pain, but you know, if you take expenses off your taxes as a writer, it certainly counts as a legitimate business expense.
Yeah, Janine, I'll tell you, it's my go-to. Whenever I start anything, I start with Ancestry. I want to know who their parents were and who their siblings were and who their kids were. And then, of course, descendants are always important. But those two sources online are great. And you know, it beats a lot of the microfiche stuff that we all still have to do. I mean, I was just at the library a couple weeks ago. But it's a lot easier because you can search as opposed to microfiche where you hope, you know. Yeah, Carol, real quick.
Hi. Thank you for the wonderful book. I enjoyed it so much. I do love a mystery, and I love Edith Wharton. I remember going back to Ethan Frome many, many years ago, but as a native New Yorker and also as a very long time Massachusetts resident, I'm wondering if you spent time at the Mount.
I did. I went to the Mount. It's a funny story. I went to the Mount.
Thank you.
While I was working on it. But I didn't tell anybody I was working on a book about Edith Wharton. And then I got an email from their programmer about 6 months later, and they said, we'd like you to come and speak at the Mount. And I said, wow, that's awesome. But how did you know I was writing a book about Edith? And they said, oh, no, we want you for Lindbergh. But I am going back in September to do a presentation on this book. It's such a wonderful place. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Thank you. All right, we got some more here. I love these. All the So by the way, real quick on Mariah, I think that Janine did have an interesting question. Was there one source, one newspaper that you felt that gave you, you know, more of that, you know, feeling had more authoritative source?
I think I'm trying to remember now. The New York World was very good, and the Brooklyn Eagle has a lot of good stuff too.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
There's more. This is the church. I know this is the church. I think I've seen the church. The next one. Yeah.
So here, Calvary Episcopal Church, which again still stands today.
It wasn't ugly brown. Come on.
It's a little beaten up. It looks prettier here in the painting. But you know, the Roosevelts worshiped there, Morgan and the Jones family when Edith was a child, and she used it as a setting in the Age of Innocence. So it was very wild that Phillips was also buried there. Here are 2 shots. I love this wacko modern cover for Susan Lennox.
Well, it looks like something I thought it was, one of those grocery store paperback,
Right.
ugh,
I mean, I feel like
gives romance a bad name. Don't tell Amy Harmon I said that.
I love those covers. And I think this is the first edition of House of Mirth, and it's wild to me how they drew Lily Bart. It's not really how I imagine her. And so here is the original cover for Age of Innocence, which I really love, and I wish they did more books like this.
Well, this goes back to your Age of Guilt. I think that's a great title.
Yeah.
And it sort of juxtaposes against this.
Yeah.
You tell them I said so. When they redo a reprint, change the title.
That title was the library liaison's idea, and he was so upset when they said, no, we want Wharton Plot. And this is Edith in her later years, happy in France. And this is, I think this is so emblematic of how people see Edith Wharton, who misunderstand her, that this was a cartoon that they did when she was touring the front and raising funds for the war effort in France, and she's doing all this incredible work, and they sort of paint her as this Zoftig lady with her lorgnette, viewing the battle.
Yikes.
Yeah. And this is Edith Wharton's childhood house today. It is now a Starbucks. So I just thought it was funny in a book that is all about changing New York and losing your city. Well, here we go. So I will stop sharing.
So unfair.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why we can't do better by her. That's one of the things I love about the Mount. I mean, it's been through several incarnations, but at least, they've preserved that. And they knocked down poor Henry James's house, during his lifetime.
I think it's horrible. I mean, that's what I'm really big into historical preservation when it comes to homes and buildings and things like that. It's just so sad because you lose the sense of, the place. It goes along with, not just setting, but it carries history in terms of its architecture, in terms of everything. I don't know. It just really breaks my heart when that happens. And they've done a lot of that in New York. I know in DC, and even in every small town, probably on the country, they've, back in the 50s, 60s, 20s, I guess. Only recently have they stopped doing quite so much of it. So is there a title for your new book, Mariah?
There isn't, and I think they're going to have a hard time. My agent suggested Marky and Zelda, and I was like, yeah, they won't know whether to go with Locked Room or Zelda. I think they're going to really try and get Zelda in there, but yeah, it's going to be a challenge, I think. If anybody has ideas, I'm very open.
I don't know. I have to read it first, right? Are there other questions you guys have for Mariah about the Wharton Plot? As I was telling her, my new book that's coming out in the fall is a bunch of murders in the Wharton households in Philadelphia and in Washington and in Baltimore. So they're all Whartons, but probably a different line. It's the Joseph Wharton family. Any questions? Anybody? Jean, you always got a question. Is Teresa on? I thought I saw Savannah. Anybody have anything else? Yes, Jean.
If there was a subject that you could write a book about, whether or not your agents agreed with it, what would it be?
I proposed a novel about Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine. Because they were sisters, they had such a rocky relationship, and between the two of them, they cover so much amazing film history. but they, you have Hitchcock, you have Gone with the Wind, you have, just such amazing stuff, Errol Flynn. But they said no one knows who Olivia de Havilland is. I know.
She's
Okay.
still alive, isn't she?
No, I think she just died at the
Is
age
she?
of-
Because she was, I'm on the board of a film festival here. She was here a couple of years ago. And she's like
Oh my
104
God.
when she showed up. Yeah,
God.
it's crazy.
Yeah, she was, well, that's too bad.
It is too bad. It is. It is. They're very narrow now about what you can do. I mean, I love the medieval period.
Mhm.
I have a friend who's doing an amazing French Revolution novel, and it's very hard to find publishers for that these
Mhm.
days, which is really a shame.
It is.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I had trouble getting through in the book was every time she would talk about herself at 49 as though she was 89. And I'm thinking to myself, my Lord, how old was she? I thought she was in her late 40s, as opposed to 75. Or I mean, it was so interesting how people were seen and how women especially were seen in that time period, because men of the same age were still seen as vibrant, where she's 49 years old and she's acting as though her life is over because she's so old.
Right. And it was funny because I had her in the book sort of fume that people would think David Graham Phillips was still a young man at 45, I think he was, or 46. And lo and behold, one of the reviews for the book says, David Graham Phillips is young and dashing. I'm like, wait, no, he's not actually. I mean, he's not that much younger. But I thought, lo and behold,
Written by a man, I assume.
it was one of the good guys, which sort of shocked me. Okay,
Well,
Brian.
even the line in there where
Funny.
she was unable to go to the funeral without an escort or without a gentleman to escort her. I mean, I thought that was over by 1920, but I guess it wasn't. It was still a thing. A lady couldn't be out on her own, I suppose, like that.
Right. I think certainly she would not have felt appropriate doing so. But yeah.
Crazy rules. Anyone else before I let Mariah go and we thank her for all her wonderful writing? Janet's been quiet tonight. Everybody's being very quiet tonight. I guess it's early in the month.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariah. Like I said, we really enjoyed it, and I apologize to everyone that we had this scheduling conflict between Mariah and I.
My fault entirely.
It's okay. I think it was only a little bit too. So, but we appreciate you taking the time to come join us and talk about this. I enjoyed it. It was a quick read, which is always fun, if I propose books that are 500 pages or more, I get groans. Oh, so we really enjoyed it, and we want to thank you.
I'm looking forward to your Wharton book.
Thank you. Looking forward to having you read it. Thanks, Mariah. We'll stop
Thank
recording.
you.